everyone, welcome back to the Music Chat, where we're going to be talking about our last Lenten hymn for the season, and we've chosen Amazing Grace. And we chose that because it's the last of the pieces that were put together in our Lenten medley for the prelude throughout Lent that Pastor Jeff has so artistically put beautiful pictures and words with. And so this is kind of the culmination of the medley that will be week 5 and 6 of Lent. We'll be hearing that. But it has a rich history. We know that a lot of people maybe know the basic story of Amazing Grace. I was one of those. I sort of knew the basic story of John Newton being on a ship, and the ship was in a big storm for several days, and it was a pretty bad, in fact, one man went overboard, was never heard from again. And so it was a very devastating storm that almost took the ship down. And Newton had, had some, like what he called a conversion experience when he asked, the Lord to have mercy on the ship. And, they did make it back to land. So that was kind of the skeleton of the story. And we know that he wrote the Amazing Grace words after this experience, but I think a lot of people thought maybe it was right after that experience, but in fact it was 18 years later after he reflected upon it. And so we're going to go back because there was a lot of reasons why that experience on the ship even happened to him in the first place. So
That's
Barbara,
right.
take us back. John Newton, born in 1725. In England. Tell us about him, his childhood.
Really, and again, I agree with you. You have that one kind of a cell of idea of where this came from, and then going back and seeing where he actually came from. Boy, does it ever
And what the state of mind was for him at that point in his life.
Yeah, boy, he was something else. He was born in London, and his father was a ship captain type person. His mother was the one that taught him about the church and taught him about the Bible, and he was very close to her, but she died when he was 7. And we were talking earlier what created this very angry, disobedient child, and we kind of came to the conclusion that there was just that anger and sadness from his mother dying
and it was what happened to him afterwards. He was sort of lost in the shuffle, I think.
They sent him to boarding school.
He had a good start with her. He had the seeds of what he would need much later.
In fact, she was always saying that she was training him to be a clergyman, and of course she died before she was able to do that. So she had given him those seeds of what having God in your life is like, and what Christ.
But those seeds were buried for a while.
Buried.
He was raised by a stepmother who came into the picture, and he didn't have a good relationship with her. They sent him to boarding school where he was mistreated.
Bad situation.
So already there's trouble.
But a lot of that was of his own doing, because again, a child that is angry and sad lashes out in lots of different ways.
Right.
And that's what I think he was
still
doing.
True today, not just in the 1700s.
Absolutely. We both know of children like that. And I've always gone back to, I wonder what it is that has made that child so angry. So at 11, his father put him on the ship.
With him?
Yeah. So he was 11 years old on this ship with all these other sailor people. And again, he was just trying to rebel against everything. In fact, on one of the things they talk about him doing, even as a young person, is making up these little rhymes that were to taunt the captain. And so the other sailors would learn them, and they go, "No, you didn't." And he got in trouble for that. He was lashed because he tried to escape. And what did they do?
He was doing childish things, but then as he grew older, he's a young man now, 17, 18, 19, that starts to manifest in just,
Yeah.
he's drinking, he's cussing,
Yeah,
he's,
yes, they
you
said
know,
he was the most profane person that
yeah,
they've ever known.
he was offensive to even the people who
On the boat.
who were
on the
themselves
ship.
profane.
Yeah,
So he wasn't well liked. He
No.
wasn't well liked by the good or the bad. He just made a menace of himself.
yes, he was just, he was a mess. And they kind of threw him in the Navy and
Yeah.
conscripted him into the Navy.
He was in one of the articles I read, it actually said he was kidnapped into the Navy. It's like, you're going, boy.
Forget about it, we're
Yeah.
sick of you, right. And he tried to escape there. And they finally dropped him off in Africa somewhere because they really didn't know what else to do with him.
Yeah, they traded him.
That's
They
right.
traded him
As
to
a slave.
a ship, and this is where things really got dark
Yeah.
for him. This ship was involved in slave trading, which was
Right.
a big commerce at the time for the country of Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was trading going on with North America and
Mhm.
Africa at the time, and he was on these ships
Mm-hmm.
where he learned about the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
But he was still a putrid man,
Mm-hmm.
you know, doing horrible things.
Right.
And just making a menace of himself still. And so they actually traded him to the Navy traded him to this ship,
That's right.
who then had to deal with him
Yeah.
themselves. So they sent him to a plantation, they traded him away
To a plantation.
to a plantation.
Yeah, and he was badly treated there, and
He became enslaved himself.
he became enslaved himself. And you would think that might alter the way he treated slaves later on, but no.
Yeah.
So finally, I think his father actually sent somebody to try to find him
Mhm.
and bring him home.
So now we're in, he was born in 1725. Now we're in 1748 when that part of the story continues. So go ahead with the life on the Greyhound ship.
Oh, right. So, and this is in that return trip from that enslavement back to Ireland, actually it was where they had the terrible storm. And it was where he said, God have mercy on us. And I think it was like an awakening for him.
Yeah, it was a real struggle. It went on for many, many hours, this terrible storm.
They had to lash themselves
like several
this-
days
yeah.
of probably no sleep, no food,
It was-
just trying to
Stay alive.
rinse the deck, empty the deck from the water and try not to capsize. And one man's already gone
Right.
overboard. It was a real problem, and that, like you said, he had those words, "Lord, have mercy on us," and he was a desperate man.
Yeah, at that point, he really reached the bottom of the pit, I
So
think, at that
2
point.
weeks later, they land
They
finally.
landed, yeah. And I think he was obviously very grateful that they had made it, and
But he started to wonder if he was worthy of God's mercy.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of a turning point. I mean, he calls it his conversion experience.
It does.
So I guess fair to say that this was the beginnings of the search now.
and that's a good way to put it, because I believe that experience made him want to search more and do it the right way. He read The Imitation of Christ. It was a book. He also had always, well, not always, but for quite a while, had a sweetheart in Mary, and they called her Polly, and he met her when she was 14, but then he goes back later and wants to marry her, and she is a stabilizing influence on him as well. But I think he had to go to her father and ask for her hand in marriage, and he had to have a job, and so he did what he knew how to do, which was to work on a ship, on a slave ship.
Yeah.
So he did not give it up right away after this beginning of his conversion.
And you might think, why not? But it really, the way I understand it is that slave trade, like I said in the beginning, was a respectable commerce, a form of commerce for the country of Britain at that time.
Right.
And so it wasn't really looked upon as something immoral.
I agree, and he even says, or I don't know whether he said it, but it was documented that he, during that time, those couple of years that he continued doing it after this conversion experience, that he did mistreat people.
Yeah.
And
well, I think what began to change was, he gave up the profane words, and he started realizing that the way that he mocked people, and he started to lose some of that. So he was slowly changing.
And he also had someone loving him, which
That's right.
makes a big difference. And she was a godly person, I think.
And they actually had a church life in the community where they were home based, even though he was still off on the ship. I understand there was 3 major voyages, after he came back home from this terrible storm, where he was involved with slave trade and gone for a while. And but he had started to change, yet he still wasn't making the connection about how wrong even his vocation was.
And again, I think it's because it was what he knew, and it was a job, so that he was able to provide. But on the last trip, he suffered a stroke, actually. He collapsed and suffered a stroke. So he went back to England and never did it again.
Right.
And that's when he really started to study and started to remember probably those words of his mother, and really work on becoming a person of God instead of...
Yeah, and at first I think he was... like a customs agent or something near Liverpool. So
he did
he still had a job that was not, and a year later became a priest or a clergyman. Yeah, a clergyman's a better word for it. But for a little while there, he was just doing this job in Liverpool, but still starting to read more, starting to connect more with community. And it's just having a normal life with his wife.
And when he first tried to, when he made the decision to become a clergyman, he came to some opposition because he had never gone to the university. But there were people that supported him. There were people that were kind of the ins in the community that supported him, and he was able to be ordained. And they gave him a calling, a position in Olney.
Yeah, it was a small village, a poor village.
Right.
Yeah.
And they make lace there. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That was what the main industry of the town was, that they make lace. So these were people that were not, they were rather poor. Most of them were literate, but he had a wonderful ministry with them.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier to you, I was intrigued by the fact that they said that when he became this clergyman, that one of the requirements always for the clergymen when they sent them out was to be able to write hymn words, not the music so much, but they were supposed to be able to write text and to write poetry. And of course, he was good at that. So that apparently...
Well, he found out he was good at it.
Yeah, well, I think that he had done it earlier, but it was with those taunting little rhymes for the... Probably with a lot of profanity. So these were, of course, they were hymn words that he used with his congregation to help them become part of the service. And he was very moved by the evangelical movement of John and Charles Wesley, and Whitehead, our guys that we talked about before. And so he really did have a goal to try to bring the congregation into the service.
Well, imagine that you're a parishioner in this little town of Olney, and here comes this guy who's been out on the sea and been places, really traveled through his shipping job and had experiences, all kinds of life experiences. So here's this rather colorful guy who comes to be your clergyman, your preacher, and they were quite drawn to him because he had so much life experience that was very interesting to listen to. I mean, he had a point of view that was,
He had a lot of empathy, I'm sure.
he had a lot of credibility because he had lived a bad life.
Yeah.
And here he is telling us that, you know, God is the place for mercy, you know. And so he was very charismatic with his congregation. They were very drawn to him. And so they would write, he started writing hymns for these weekly prayer services.
That's right.
So we're around 1772 now. He's well established in his little village there, and he's starting to write these hymns with another man, whose name was William Cowper.
Right.
And he was in the village and liked what he heard. He was taken in also by Newton's ministry. And he had a similar, he was kind of a misguided adult too by that time.
But at that time he was known as a poet in England at that time.
He was. He had failed as a lawyer, and he had fought depression.
He just came out of the insane asylum.
Yeah.
Which we know nowadays it was probably just because he fought depression and he was suicidal.
Yeah.
So that's why he was there.
But at least for this time period, he was all right. He worked.
Yes.
He collaborated with Newton on many hymns that they would use for these weekly prayer services,
That's
and
right.
they would change according to whatever was being discussed that night. So along comes the New Year's 1773, and the text was going to be Chronicles.
That's right. Yeah.
It was going to be about talking about David and how he was chosen by God to be the seed for his ancestors were going to be on and on.
Right.
And so it was going to be that discussion. Why David, and did David feel worthy? Did he not feel worthy? And do we feel worthy? And so he penned the words to Amazing Grace. And that's where it started. They think that was the first public use of the hymn. We don't know if it was sung or said.
Probably not.
Yeah, we know it was at least said.
And their little hymnal anthology thing were just words. There was no music with them. So what a source for so many people coming after that to take them and put them
and
to
so,
hymns.
well, that was 1773, and then he and Cowper continued to collaborate, and they published, anonymously by the way, the Only Hymns,
Only Hymns
in 1779, and it was full of their hymns. And I think it was anonymous because it was used to fundraise for the village.
Probably.
It was, the profits went back into the village and to the church. But that's where it was first published, words only.
Right.
I think we have a picture of the Only Hymn book and possibly the page that Amazing Grace was first on. And its title wasn't Amazing Grace. The title was 1 Chronicles 17, 16, and 17. So 1 Chronicles chapter 17, verse 16 and 17, comma, Faith's Review and Expectation.
I know.
That was the whole title. And then I think later it became Faith's Review and Expectation, but then the first line was Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound.
And then eventually with a lot of hymns, the title became whatever was the first line.
Right.
So
makes sense.
You can see how it easily
Thank goodness, because that makes it easier to find it in the hymn book.
Yeah. So, and then, they corroborated for quite a long time, and then he actually, the Cropper guy, is it Cropper?
Cowper.
Cowper, that's it. The Cowper person, William Cowper, again, suffered from depression, and he finally left, but the publication remains, and
and I guess it, really, it sort of died there for a while.
It didn't really do much.
It wasn't really distributed, or but what happened to it eventually was, the Only Hymns was out, you know, and it was used some, but meanwhile we have hymns coming from Europe to America, because people were moving to America, you know, from Europe, all over Europe, and including England. And so in the southern Appalachia area, where there was a lot of evangelizing going on.
Second Great Awakening.
That's true.
Yeah.
But even the 50 years after he's done with Amazing Grace and only, you know, it starts to appear in different hymn books here.
With lots of different
and
melodies.
It's starting to be passed orally somewhat, you know, and you know, and then what happened was all this time has gone on, and it's being sung to different tunes. It's like somewhere between 20, 30, 40 different melodies had been used to sing the hymn, but not the one we know today, until we come to another William, and that William was William Walker, who was an American composer, and in 1835, so that's 50 or so years after Newton uses it with his congregation, he assigned the words to a traditional folk song, or songs. We think it was two different melodies that hadn't been published, Gallagher and St. Mary's they were called, probably of British origin, but we don't really know for sure. But well known in the Appalachia areas, the tunes. And so now, for the first time in 1835, we have our Amazing Grace that we know from today tuned to those amazing words.
And published in the...
a few years later, 1847, he publishes the Southern Harmony Shape Note
songbook, Oh my. Right, and so that's really the origin for us. For the words and the music. That's how.
And that song has the title New Britain. It's called the New Britain Melody.
The melody does, And we think maybe it's because those two little folk tunes were put together and probably they had British origin, so they just called it New Britain.
New Britain, exactly. Well, and we've talked about this in some of the other chats. A shaped note hymn book was used to teach singing.
That's right.
And it wasn't just hymns, it was society songs too. I think the Southern Harmony book had patriotic songs in it, maybe children's songs in it, and hymns as well. Societal songs that were being sung and used by the communities. And they would go from town to town, music teachers sometimes, or people who were musicians would go to communities and teach how to read, or how to read shaped notes.
I know.
Which, you know, we talked a little bit about it here again. I know I sent Pastor Jeff the copy of William Walker's 3-part arrangement for this. So hopefully on the screen we'll have those 3 lines. So the first line is a sort of a descant line. The middle line is the melody that we sort of recognize. And then the bottom line is like a bass line and harmony. So we have a top harmony and a bottom harmony with the melody in the middle. And Barbara's going to sing for us that melody line, and she's going to use it, you know, when they put the words everywhere on these things, and so, you know, she's going to use the words that are closest to the line there, which is not the Amazing Grace verse, but the 'Twas Grace that taught us, you know. So
it's very similar to what we sing. There are a few little differences, but looking at the music, I would, as a person who reads music, those shape notes, it's like, what are you doing to me? You know, let's just read the music.
Well, we need someone to come teach us like they did.
Golly, it's just so strange. Anyway, it is this. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my that grace appear, the hour I first believed. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. So it's kind of sort of.
You know, to me, it's kind of remarkable how little of the words have been messed with. You know, I mean, we see so many hymns that have been revised and revised, and the words are really pretty. From what I can tell from researching, those words kept on.
Yeah, because
and the melody didn't change much either from the New Britain.
Because the other verses are here, and
they're pretty close.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it started to take on a world of its own.
Yeah, well, we'll talk a little about the verses, because we had said that we thought that was sort of significant. You know, it's said that now the scholars really have gone back and looked at his life and the point at which this was written, and they really call it an autobiographical hymn of his life. And I think that these words really were born out of a lifetime's worth of experience. You know, it wasn't just words that popped into his head that night after the ship went, the ship landed.
I think that was the thing that I hope people will take away from this little talk, because there is that feeling, that Hollywood feeling, that he just, was on the ship and wrote it out. And now when you look at those words and realize what kind of background he had, I think they have much more meaning to us.
You know, the use of the word "saved a wretch like me." Wow, where else do you have that in a lyric? Anywhere. Where does wretch ever appear in a song lyric besides this song?
That's what he felt about himself.
And that's pretty telling right there. But he did come to have a lot of regret about his involvement with the slave trade. It took him a whole lifetime to figure it out practically. But, those last years of his ministry and then all that time to reflect on how his life had been, there are words that are born out of that for sure.
Yeah.
But specifically, verse 1 is said to have come from the prodigal son story in Luke. I once was lost, but now is found. And then was blind, but now I see, is referring to the Gospel of John and where Jesus heals the blind man.
Right.
And we could go verse by verse, and we would see some of these parallels to Scripture. His hymns were, in the only hymns that they wrote, they were songs about faith and salvation, wonder at God's grace and love for Jesus. And they were cheerful exclamations of the joy he found in his faith, at least the later years, that he found this joy of being saved in spite of himself.
And this personal
style
was part of that evangelical movement as well. That was, a little bit separate from the Anglican traditional church.
And he, just to sum up what happened with the slave trade and how we know that he had strong feelings against the slave trade towards the end of his life. He helped to encourage the Slave Trade Act of 1807 in British Parliament.
That's right.
And but he didn't really become a true abolitionist until after he left Olney, even later in his life, in the 1780s. And this is a quote from him: "It will always be a subject of humiliating reflection for me that I was once an active instrument in the business for which my heart now shudders."
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That sums it up. And so it really is an autobiography of how he felt about, his times.
I think that's why it means so much to so many people, because we all do things that are not godly, I'm sure, you know, and hopefully it's not to the same degree that he did. But there are things always that we have regrets about, and I believe that's why it speaks to us.
Well, we always
so
fall
personally.
short,
Always
and
fall
so
short.
there's that word grace, the amazing grace.
Right.
You know, no matter how we fall short, we can count on His amazing grace to
Right.
pick us right back up.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
the deal, you know.
I know. Now talk about the one verse that we have.
Yeah, he kind of to end our chat really. You know, the verses he wrote was I think 6.
Mhm.
And then there was an additional verse that Harriet Beecher Stowe actually is responsible for, the verse that has, when we've been there 10,000 years. That's a very well-known verse.
Bright shining as the sun.
Yeah, it's
oh
a
my
great
gosh.
verse. That's actually her verse that
It is.
she put in Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yeah.
And
Fascinating.
I
I never knew
had
that.
no idea, yeah. And that has really not been changed much either. It's pretty much her words, I believe. And so we have this great hymn still today, and Barbara was telling me a little bit before we started the chat about how it, you know, has had this evolution from church life and the evangelical movement, and it's kind of morphed over through singers,
popular
you know, from
genre.
secular singers. Many, almost, I guess Judy Collins was one of the
Yeah,
first
it was
to
on
do it.
on number 1 on the top 10 list for
Yeah.
weeks and weeks.
Right.
And so that just tells you how universal it is
And
and how
it would be
speaks.
interesting to do a chat sometime and have people tell us their stories about Amazing Grace, because
Mhm.
everyone has them.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, mine are just, it's a pipe band
Right.
tune, and so I played it hundreds of times
Right.
to close pipe concerts
Right.
and to, you know,
Funerals.
many funerals.
Weddings.
Yeah, weddings, you know, people loving on the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara posed the question to me. She's moved by it even when it's just played instrumentally. And she said, "Is that because I know the words, or is that something to do with the tune itself?"
I think that's a very curious
And
thing.
I mean, it's another chat, really.
Really, and
you know.
I put it out to you to think about that. If you did not know the words to Amazing Grace, but you heard it played on pipes or whatever, would it be as stirring as it is now because you know the words? Is it the intervals? We talked about the fact that it's the reveille
Yeah.
intervals.
You know, the tune Reveille that we associate with
Mhm.
funerals. Well, first of all, those intervals
Are
are
natural harmonics. Yeah.
they're from nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's
natural harmonics.
it's an inverted triad, and it has fourths and fifths and thing, you know, that kind of stuff in it.
Right.
And so it's kind of out of nature, but listen to what we do if we change that.
Mm-hmm.
That's those same. So I don't know
I think it's fascinating.
how it's just an accident that I have noticed from playing it many times and looking at the melody, and
Yeah,
you know.
and I'm sure there have been people that have researched those connections between intervals and emotions. I'm sure there are theses out there.
And as I said, you know, I mean, when somebody arranges it harmonically,
Mm-hmm.
beautifully,
Mm-hmm.
that's very wonderful too. And so, I mean, you could do a whole chat about why does it draw us in when it's sung a cappella,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just as a single line. Why does it draw us in when we just hear it instrumentally and we don't even have any words going on?
Uh-huh.
You know, what is it that draws us in?
I know, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
Well,
but it certainly does.
It does, and sorry,
Someone's calling in, Barbara.
I know. It's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that's a fascinating topic, and I hope that just with some of our discussion, that even a hymn like Amazing Grace that they were afraid was going to become a cliche because it was used so much, still has great meaning and maybe even more meaning for us after thinking about its journey and the person who put those words on paper.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, thank you for journeying through Lent with us here with our music chats, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.